Let me repeat for you. Since 1980,
but you can keep on repeating Mother Jones. Look,
please,
Piers, if you
allow me to
want to
repeat,
rely on Mother Jones,
you can't
that's
do what you always do.
It's another terrible shooting in the news, and so another screaming throwdown with Piers Morgan trying to talk over the brilliant John Lott, who's our guest now. Of course, he's the author of the seminal book More Guns, Less Crime, and his brand new book called Dumbing Down the Courts came out this week. John Lott, thanks for joining us this morning. We promise not to shout over you.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, that exchange with Piers Morgan was about one of the myths that I want you to blow up. He was perpetuating this myth. Piers Morgan was on CNN. Over on MSNBC, his tag team partner there in the wrestling match that is cable news, Rachel Maddow, she did a whole segment on the fact that if you look at the last 100 years of mass shootings in America, that's a crime. They're defining it as 12 people or more being shot. The first 6 spanned the first 50 years of our country, but the latest 6 have all happened within the last decade. That proves, John Lott, that these things are happening more frequently. Is that true?
No. And the only way you can get that is you leave out a lot of cases that happened in earlier years. I mean, I don't know about this 12 or more. This is the first time I've heard.
That's where they're drawing the line. I mean, and Piers was trying to do the same thing, that this is happening over and over again. He kept quoting Mother Jones.
Right. Well, Mother Jones uses the definition, they say, of 4 or more. The problem is, and other academics have pointed this out too, they don't use the definition consistently. There was a similar problem, I don't know, about a decade ago with the New York Times. They had a story where they said, look, in the mid-'90s there was this huge explosion of these mass shootings. The problem was that I'd called up and talked to the reporter at that case, and they said they'd only looked carefully at the ones in the most recent years and hadn't looked at the ones carefully earlier. They'd simply missed a lot of the earlier cases that were there, and that's what made it look like there was a sudden big increase. And the same thing's happening in this case with Mother Jones.
In this particular case, and in some of the more recent cases, it appears that we have people who are mentally unstable. And there's going to be a lot of talk about whether we need additional laws. But if anywhere along the line someone had raised the flag on these guys, either mental health officials or police officials, or in the case of this latest shooting, Navy officials, he probably would have come up, it would have prevented him from getting a weapon, wouldn't it, if somebody had just raised the flag earlier?
Well, it's pretty hard to stop people who want to commit these types of crimes from getting a weapon. In this case, all he had gotten was he had gotten a shotgun in this case. But if you want to, there's costs and benefits for all these things. It's a lot easier to look at these things after the fact. The second point that I would make is that if they're going to ban something, why not keep the guy from getting the security clearance to get through? I mean, then you don't even have to have issues about whether the person's convicted or not. They should be able to take into account information whether the person's had multiple arrests, even if he wasn't convicted in those cases.
But let me just follow up on it. If he had been convicted or charged with a crime and convicted, that would have shown up in a background check, right?
Yeah, it's shown up in a background check.
If he had been flagged by mental health officials as not being sane, there would have been some steps that could have been taken to prevent him from buying weapons. Would that not be the case under current law?
Right. What I'm trying to say, there's a distinction between saying that somebody is technically prevented from getting a gun, and you're actually going to stop them from getting it. If you look at the background checks, the big problem with the current system is that virtually everybody who gets flagged is a false positive. So we don't know the exact number because the annual reports aren't very well done, but about 96% at least of the people who are stopped are false positives. I mean, you take a simple story, Ted Kennedy, the late Senator Ted Kennedy, there was 5 times where his name was on the no-fly list. When the president goes and says something like 2 million prohibited people have been prevented from buying guns because of the background checks, the correct terminology is that there are 2 million people who were initially denied being able to go and buy guns. And you can see this in terms of things like who they bring cases against or convictions.
Yeah.
So in 2010, there were about 76,000 initial denials but you end up with like 13 convictions out of 76,000. One thing that I've criticized Republicans for is they'll go and they'll say, Obama's just not enforcing the law. And that's simply not true. Bush had very low convictions as a percentage also. If Bush, if there were real violations, he would have gone after them. The problem is that to go and say, so like you'll have somebody, unfortunately, like even a Ted Cruz or Graham from South Carolina, they'll say, look, there were 15,000 felons who were flagged for buying a gun, but the Obama administration only prosecuted, a handful of these individuals.
Yeah.
And the thing is, saying that somebody was flagged for having the name of a felon is not the same thing as saying that a felon was trying to buy a gun.
Well, and also, John Lott, even if somebody is prevented legitimately of getting a firearm these days, they can just go and get it illegally. The criminals are still going to get guns. Let me ask you this, though, really quick. We've only got a minute left, but a lot of people are making the case that we need to have our military personnel who are on these bases armed so that they can defend themselves, keep Fort Hood from happening, keep Navy Yard from happening. Can you explain why is it our military, the people who are trained to use firearms in combat, why they can't carry guns when they're there on a military base?
It's pretty amazing. You hear these guys who are experts, have been trained, and if you go back, just a couple decades, people were able to go and carry their sidearms with them.
What changed?
Well, I think there was this desire to go and try to make military bases more like regular workplaces that were there. And but there have been lots of changes that have occurred over time in terms of banning guns from certain places. It's just that I understand the desire to go and try to ban guns from places, but at some point, people are going to have to deal with the fact that it's not an accident that these mass shootings keep on occurring in places where guns are banned.
John Lott, we got to leave it there. I'm so sorry, but we're out of time. It's always good to have you.